Most of you probably know by now that I like to remain positive. I like to take the high road in a world where YouTube, depending on the day, may or may not be a cesspool full of bad actors that want to take the lowest road possible. And it's on those same days that I dream of starting a segment entitled, "Would you believe the shit this brain surgeon left in the comments?" Well, just the other day, I got my first complaint about Season 9, specifically the selection of cars we have presented to you. And it read something like this: "You realize that not everybody wants to drive an S63 or a GT3 or something ridiculous like that. So, to you, Mr. Hospital Corners, I dedicate today's episode. We're going to put aside a V8, we're going to put aside 2 turbos, or God forbid 480 horsepower, and we're going to drive something incredibly practical. We're going to drive a baby buggy. We're going to drive one that is super reliable, and we're going to drive one with 3 seats. So, I'm going to call this segment, Be Careful What You Wish For, because you'll get it." Okay, let's try this luxury baby buggy in its natural habitat. I mean, after all, this thing was invented, 20 plus years ago by Lexus for exactly this kind of neighborhood. But now we finally have some differences here, at least in the size of it. So let's put our foot into it. Remember, 263 pounds of torque, comes in at 4,700. Put our foot into it. A little bit bigger vehicle, and you can't notice the difference. I've been driving this thing now over a week, and you just don't notice a difference at all. Like, even, I'm going to turn off into a side street and drive it just around small streets here where you would do a lot of stop and go traffic. Granted, I'm trying to avoid some traffic today, but you just don't notice the extra weight. And I've been looking on different sources from Toyota and Lexus, and it's anywhere between 120 and 180 extra pounds for the seat, the length, the metal that goes to make the long version of the 350. And if you were to take someone who's been driving this thing, I want to say 20 years, or probably had 2 of them in 20 years, because it's the kind of car where it doesn't die. It's handed down to your kids, kind of like that person did with that one there, and then you go tear another one off the roll, and here's another one that probably won't die, but the person who's been driving that thing for so long wouldn't even notice the difference, even if you showed them the extra metal in the back. Okay, so it's time for some rather important math. The wheelbase. In the standard RX350, it is 109.8. In the long RX350, it is 109.8. So how do they shoehorn 2 extra seats back there? Well, it's a combination of some additional metal as well as some trickery and engineering hocus pocus. So back here, from this to this, they add an additional 4.3 inches, so it takes the length from 192.5 to 196.8. But that's not the only thing going on here. If you were to look at the D-pillar of a standard RX350, it would be more raked like this, where this one is more steep. So really, it's a combination of metal, but packaging trickery to make the overall product 7 seats. Okay, now that we know the dirty little secret of how they shoehorn those 2 extra seats back there, does it drive any different in terms of driving dynamics? Well, on a narrow straight road like this, can't really determine that. So let's go off to the side here. Welcome to Hermosa Beach. We've got some hills here. So let's go down the hill, pick up the speed a little bit. Please don't try this at home. And speed bump here. So let's try to disturb the plane of motion and see if it makes a difference. And again, virtually no difference in driving this from the standard wheelbase of the RX350. That's because the wheelbase is the same, the length is different. And you would think a car that has too much weight in any one place, like think of a 911, where there's too much weight in the back because the engine's like hanging out way back there like a pendulum. It feels different when you first drive it because it's odd, it's not what you're used to. Here, you don't feel that extra weight hanging out there. In fact, I've had people in the back just to kind of test it out to see if I feel the weight of 2 people, and you really don't even feel that. Now let's come around here, make some turns a little sharper, and you don't even feel it when you're trying to push the thing beyond its limits. I mean, after all, this is a crossover, which means it's based off of a sedan and not a sporty one. Man, this is not the LC500, even the hybrid that I had right before this. The Lexus you and I are driving today has something called a Mark Levinson audio system in it. And if you're an audiophile, you've absolutely heard of Mark Levinson before. But if you're the kind of person that buys their girlfriend or their grandmother a Bluetooth speaker for their phone, you're more likely to have heard of Harman Kardon, and it would stand to reason because of like home speakers, or they own JBL that outfit concert venues. But to a lesser extent, they're kind of known as a cross between the wizard behind the curtain and the heads of the 5 crime families in the OEM car audio world. A couple of examples, like when you and I drive a Genesis that has a Lexicon audio system. Take a wild guess who manufactures that. Or if we drive a Hyundai that has an Infinity audio system, take a wild guess who manufactures that. Well, circle back to our Lexus, I'll give you one good guess who manufactures Mark Levinson, at least for a Lexus. Well, I recently had the opportunity to go behind the scenes at their R&D facility up in Detroit, and I was expecting speakers, and more speakers. Well, I got a bit of a surprise because last year, Harman Kardon was purchased by Samsung. And if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, Samsung is sitting there off to the side, and you're like, well, Apple's getting into the car world, and Google's getting into the car world. We need to get into the car world. So like any big or even small company, they do the fix, sell, or buy decision, and they decided to buy. And I'm thinking they bought Harman Kardon because here's a company that not only knows how to package for a car, but they have all these relationships with a number of different car manufacturers. So it gives them a hell of an advantage. But what I saw was something really unexpected in that they're taking it from just audio and trying to bat above their station in life in designing the entire UX, not just the audio UX. So they put me in this Maserati convertible, and you sit in the car, and the first thing you notice is it's a completely different dashboard. They ripped the thing out, designed their own, and the first thing you see when the car is off, it looks like a really tall, like LED light that goes the width of the dashboard. But then you start the car, and the whole thing picks up, and it reveals this very wide and tall screen that is the entire dashboard. Even the center stack is like this waterfall, this curved glass waterfall, kind of like a Samsung phone, and the whole thing is haptic feedback. Now, you know how I feel about haptic feedback for a 3,000-pound plus car. You need a real button, a real knob, because you got to keep your eye on the road, and haptic feedback, I don't care how good it is never the best solution 100%. So they were kind of thinking about me here in that they took me to another car and they had a Mini. Now, you and I have been in a number of Minis over the years, and basically the design, not just on the outside, but the design of an inside of a Mini hasn't changed since my Greek brother Alec designed it back in the 60s. So what they did is they kept that same like round center stack, but they pilfered the design from one of those Nest like HVAC controllers in your home. So it's not haptic feedback. It's actually it's a full-on knob, people. It's a huge knob that is like this center controller, but way more intuitive than in like the iDrive system in a BMW, because it's A, in front of you, and B, it works like something you've been using like your entire life, which is one of those old school thermostats, which has now evolved into this very fancy Nest thing. And I would argue this is like the more perfect of the two systems. Now granted, this is, I would say, their first go at a total UX system, and I have to say, quite a good effort for their freshman effort. Now, I am just one man, and I saw these two examples. They had a bunch of other stuff there, which my goal is to bring some of the folks behind the scenes from the Samsung side. Actually, funny story. You guys may remember an old Ford episode, one of the UX designers at Ford that was working on the Microsoft integration. Well, he now works for Samsung and Harman Kardon on this project. Anyway, I geek out about this tech stuff if you couldn't tell. So it was a pretty interesting day, but I wanted to share this deep dive and somehow relate it to a car that has a product from a company that is now part of Samsung. Anyway, Do you like it? Do you not like it? Let me know what you like, what you don't like in the comments below. And I'm pretty certain the folks at Samsung and Harman Kardon will probably see it. Okay, as an Volvo V90 Cross Country passes us, I'm gonna sit here and tell you, man, this is true love to sit back here. I got my Greek neighbor who stole a car from me, but we'll discuss that in another episode. Yeah, it works back here. I'm not gonna tell you that it's for 6-footers like me, but it'll work for children, and there's a couple of numbers we gotta cover. First and foremost, the storage back there with these seats up is 7 cubic feet, with these seats down 23 cubic feet, with these seats down 58 cubic feet. Now, if you are an RX350 aficionado, you will note that that is 2 cubic feet more than the regular, it's not wheelbase, regular length RX350, and that's because of this thing, the angle of the backlight that we talked about earlier in the episode. Then there is something which I would suggest if you're going to put 6-footers back here, and that is this seat is on offer a bench like this. Probably most baby buggy focused cars will have the bench, but it can be had with 2 buckets. I think that would be better for people who are tall and want to put their feet through. Not that you would want to spend any time back here. There is Hvac controls back here, which I think is nice, because if you're going to have a torture chamber for 6-footers, at least have them cool while they're doing it. There's cup holders back here. And then something interesting I've noticed, this, like, leather is fitted as standard in one of these things, whether it's this or the hybrid. So this seat's leather, those seats are leather, but back here, this is vinyl. So I guess you don't get the fancy treatment if you're all the way in the back, because what's the old saying? Children are to be seen, but not heard. Okay, so we started today's episode with an experiment, and the experiment was, can we change the equation of the best-selling luxury crossover that invented the segment like 20 plus years ago by adding more length, metal, and weight? And the reality is, it doesn't change the equation at all. I mean, maybe you can shoehorn like 2 pint-sized people, but that is about it. You can't put me back there. If you don't like me, then fine, you put me back there. But other than that, it's only 2 pint-sized people. In terms of the experience that this has been for the past 20 years, where people just roll into a Lexus dealer, buy one, it doesn't break, 10 years later, maybe they get sick of it, hand it to somebody else, and then tear another one off the roll, and they buy another one, and now they're on like their 3rd one or 2nd one, whatever it is. And it really reinforces the point that when you guys ask me, hey, what car should I buy? I always answer your question with 3 questions. The first one is, where do you live? What are you doing with it? And most important, how long do you want to keep it? And if that 3rd answer is more than 5 years, my list goes from this to like this. And usually the 2 or 3 manufacturers that are on the list is this. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, I'm going to completely switch gears on you, because this, it's on offer in 2 flavors. There's gasoline and there's the sort of electrified hybrid. My question is this: is there an interest for an RX, I don't care what length, in a, say, Volt-esque kind of system where there'd be like 50 miles of total EV driving? So I use it around town. I don't care what length. But keep in mind, please be realistic when I ask, how much extra would you be willing to pay? Because these things already range from, say, like mid to high 40s base price, all the way up to, say, low 60s for a fancy one like this that is the long version with the Mark Levinson stereo. So how much would you be willing to pay? What region of the world do you hail from, and what would you do with it? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV on Word, MotoManTV on Word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And until I see you next time with something hopefully far more exciting than this, bis später.